Okay, yeah, so it's going to be focusing very specifically on fundraising and how we turned our community into brand advocates and actually mobilized them to help us close a round of funding. So we closed a round about a month ago now, and we hit our initial target of £200,000 within 48 hours, and we ended up raising £300,000, so over 150% oversubscribed. And it was in no small part thanks to our amazing community. And community's been kind of core to what we do since day one. And I will run through a bit of background to JobLab, how we ended up kind of on the fundraising trail, and how we ended up actually pivoting our fundraise from initially going the traditional VC angel route, and then going down the crowdfunding route, and then some very specific growth hacks that were used during the campaign that I hope will find useful. I don't think you'll find them online, so feel free to take some notes. So a bit of background. JobLab is an online marketplace, and we directly connect startups with recent graduates. And we kind of see ourselves as the opposite of a job board. Where a job board, you kind of post a job and you wait for candidates to apply. We let candidates create a digital profile, upload a video, and give employers the tools to search through and find relevant candidates on the platform. We launched about 4 years ago. And we've been through a few small rounds of funding, but this most recent one was our most significant. And kind of down to community, we started JobLab as recent graduates ourselves, which was a blessing and a curse. A curse because we had no experience and didn't know what we were doing, but a blessing because we had a really good insight into the needs of our users, and those insights helped us build our early product and actually helped us come up with some really innovative features later down the line. And one kind of core insight that came from our community was the introduction of what we call JobLab tokens. So in 2018, after going for a couple of years, we had a problem with growth. So we got to about 10K in monthly recurring revenue, but we had really high churn rates. Our employers weren't coming back to the platform. They were fairly indifferent to us. And we decided to actually take a step back and almost become recruiters and use our platform ourselves to understand the pains that our employers were facing before it could become a self-service platform. And by actually using the platform, we found that you don't just need supply and demand for this online marketplace model to work in the recruitment space, you also need engagement. And we found it very hard to incentivize candidates to be engaged on the platform, even though it was in their best interest to do so. So we had to call candidates to make sure they were applying to jobs, we had to email them, we had to text them, and we had to force them through the hiring funnel because they weren't doing so themselves. So from a kind of a community brainstorming session, we'd run a lot of workshops, we had a lot of meetups. We actually saw on someone's phone, a job seeker, the amount of messages and spam they were getting from job boards. Read, Indeed, LinkedIn, you've been invited to a job, you've been matched. And we realized quite quickly that for a job seeker, it's very hard to know what is a valuable interaction with an employer and what is just another company trying to get your engagement. So from that insight, we introduced a currency, so JobLab tokens, and we actually started paying our community for their engagement on our platform. Because we realized that if we financially rewarded people for the engagements that would help them get a job, it would push them through the hiring funnel and they'd understand the benefits of doing so. So once we introduced that feature, we kind of overnight, we saw our response rates go from 10% to over 75%. And we decided to double down on that. And we started paying candidates these small tokens for creating profiles, for uploading videos, and for uploading their data to our platform. And that helped us scale our platform in this self-service model to we got to about 35K in monthly revenue, we got to break even, and this was towards the end of 2018. So we decided to raise a small round of funding. We wanted to raise £200,000 to accelerate growth with the help of this kind of a new feature. So our first round, or our first approach to fundraising was initially the VC route. So we realized quite quickly that VCs are very good at taking up your time. They will always take a meeting. They will always kind of express an interest, but very often, it's going to be a no-way street. And we realized for us, after spending a couple of months speaking to a lot of engaged VCs, that we weren't ready for that kind of a round. So we decided to speak to some angels, and we had some initial traction. We got a lead investor on board. We got a few other angel investors on board. We got about half of the round committed of the £200,000. But then we kind of came up to Christmas. We had some Brexit-related kind of issues, and we started to feel as though the round was losing momentum. And when you're raising money, momentum is the most fundamental part of that process. So we decided to explore and experiment with other channels, and one of them was crowdfunding, and it was a little bit unknown to us. It was one that we had initially dismissed, but it was one that we were going to try and pursue. So we kind of thought of it as somewhat a light bulb moment. We had this community that we'd built of brand advocates that we'd essentially been bribing to use our platform, that kept telling us how much they loved what we're doing and how they saw this as the future of recruitment. And we actually had candidates who would message us and ask us if we were ever going to go crowdfunding. But we initially thought, students, graduates, they don't have any money. We didn't have any money. This isn't going to be a viable option. But we decided to test it and experiment with it. And we threw up a landing page saying that we're crowdfunding. We sent it out to our most engaged users. And overnight, we had kind of over £20,000 of pre-commitments. And we realized that this was actually a channel that we could generate real momentum, pick up momentum in the round, and continue down that path. So this is the kind of stack we used for engaging our community in the crowdfunding. So initially we used Instapage to throw up a landing page. We then used Typeform to collect pre-commitments. And then we used viral loops to offer an incentive for candidates to refer their friends and increase the kind of viral coefficient of the signups. We then messaged or kind of managed the messaging of our candidate community via ActiveCampaign. We could segment our candidates into certain buckets to kind of send quite targeted messaging. And we used Twilio for SMS. And eventually that kind of went to Crowdcube when the campaign went live, and we can convert people on the Crowdcube page. And that got us to about 80% committed before the campaign went live, just by engaging our candidate community. So we know we had huge amounts of momentum, but we didn't think it was going to take us over the line, and we didn't want to rely on Crowdcube for anything, because we've heard a lot of horror stories around people that have relied on what could come in from the crowd and not done enough themselves. So we needed to kind of broaden our investor network quite substantially, because our personal networks had dried up at this point. So to do so, this was kind of our angel growth hacking investor stack. We relied quite heavily on LinkedIn. So we would create lists on LinkedIn using keywords. So we would search for people with angel or investor in their profile. We would then use a tool called LinkedIn Helper, where we could import the lists and we could send targeted messages to investors, letting them know that our campaign was going live. The first message would be something like, "Hi James, I noticed that you're an investor. We're about to go live on Crowdcube. Can I send you some more information?" They would then reply. We could then qualify those leads, put them in different buckets. The next stage, they would likely ask for a pitch deck, and we used DocSend to send our pitch deck out because it required an email address to download our deck. And then once we had an email address, we could put them into different nurture campaigns. So we could use this guy, which was Khalid. Khalid was an investment management intern found on JobLab. He did a lot of ghosting our profiles and actually qualifying investors on Crowdcube. And he could decide whether they went through Persist, which was another email marketing automation tool, or whether they went through a coffee, which was a coffee with me, and they were a high value investor. And this process meant that we could really scale our investor outreach much beyond our initial network and not have to rely on anything coming through Crowdcube. And using this approach and the list that we generated, we were able to hit our target within 48 hours. And this whole strategy was kind of pulled together with PR as well. So a company called Sonder Associates, Andy is over there, a fantastic company. They helped manage a lot of our kind of outgoing comms. We're obviously building a really big investor community on my LinkedIn and the company LinkedIn. So putting out relevant content and converting it that way was really important. We also had some very unexpected routes to gaining investors. I was on LBC for 3 minutes, and a few minutes later we had a few £1,000s worth of investment come in. So really unlikely channels, but it all fed into kind of building this whole campaign strategy and helped us ultimately get over the line. So what didn't work? Unfortunately, viral loops. We found that candidates, when we offered them kind of financial incentives for referring their friends, it didn't have the uplift we wanted. We'd actually experimented with something similar before, and it also didn't work. And actually, they much preferred the organic approach and wanted to help us rather than feel that they were getting something out of it. And Twilio, so quite a funny story. We have a database of 35,000 candidates that are active on the system. We rely quite heavily on text messaging for high engagement rates. And my co-founder thought it would be a good idea to send a text message to all our candidates, letting them know the campaign was going live. And as it was pending, because text messages get near enough 100% open rate, so it would have been a huge hit. But as the Twilio kind of campaign was pending, I checked it out. And I realized he miscalculated the amount of credits per text message, and it was going to cost us, I think, £11,000 if the campaign went out on Twilio. So fortunately, we kind of put a pause on that. We ran a smaller sample, and it just pissed people off. So wouldn't recommend texting people unless it's very important notifications, which kind of should go without saying. And yeah, so we've kind of closed our round of funding, and it takes us back to just this whole culture of growth. Now, a lot of those techniques that we used there were kind of for a one-hit. Fundraising is quite binary. It's a transaction, it's kind of the end of the transaction, and then it's down to us to build longer-term relationships with our investors. But as a company, building longer-term relationships with our candidates and our employers is really important. And in our weekly growth meetings, we're always talking about how we're using our community to gain insights and use those insights to grow the company. So I hope some of this was useful and actionable. And if you have any questions, then please come and ask me or ask now.